It was a lovely and warm, sunny day. Recess was going on. Some boys and girls were grabbing snacks. Some just sat together and talked. Some shouted. All of them amongst friends, and all of them seemed happy. Except Sabrina. The way she sat in the corner of a bench seemed like school was the last place she wanted to be right now. Her face grew darker and darker in fear. She knew the time had come, and there's nothing she could do about it. The coolest and smartest group of boys and girls were coming towards her. Everyone liked them. All the other boys and girls from her class aspired to be like them. But to Sabrina, this group was her worst nightmare. They bullied her again and again, turned her life miserable. No one would be friends with her anymore because they too would be labeled uncool and would be bullied endlessly. As the bullies went on with their torment, with their slangs, dancing around her, making fun of her in every filthiest way possible, tears rolled down from her eyes. All the other students didn't protest to this bullying. Rather, it was enjoyable to them. Everyone thought it was harmless fun. No one bothered to care. It wasn't unusual for Sabrina to spend long hours just sitting in the school bathroom stall, because there, no one could notice her crying. School was over, but she couldn't gather the energy to go back home. Her parents didn't support her. They thought she was weak. School authorities won't believe her. All those boys and girls had good reputations and were favorites to all the people at school. There was no one she could turn to. She didn't even keep count of how many times she thought of ending her life because of this. She keeps imagining how she would kill herself. It felt like she was all alone in this world. Suddenly, she heard footsteps coming into the quiet bathroom. No one was supposed to be here at this time, she thought to herself. Who could they be? Then she heard their voices and knew exactly who they were. They were her bullies. The footsteps and voices were coming towards the stall she was in, and she instantly knew the bullies targeted her, and her life was going to get a lot worse in the next few moments. She tried to get out of the stall, but she couldn't open the door. It was held from outside by the bullies. "Now you'll get what you truly deserve, you bitch," they said with a sickening tone. Sabrina tried to look through the small gap of the door. What she saw traumatized her. The boys started pissing in a bucket which they brought. She could hear and see their evil smiles. Then one of them picked the bucket up and started coming towards her stall. She backed up, but where would she go? She begged and begged them to let her go, but the door was shut from the outside. The bucket filled with piss was emptied on her in no time. Their laughs grew louder and louder. They were really enjoying themselves. Sabrina sat there on the stall, drenched in piss. It felt like her life was coming to an end. She screamed and cried. It made them laugh even more. They left her locked in the stall, so satisfied with what they had done. Sabrina knocked on the door so many times, but no one came to her help. She could feel it was already evening. The sun had set. She knew her parents wouldn't get worried about her till night. She didn't know what to do. Then again, she thought, what is the point? She should just end her life, then and there. She started crying again. She didn't know how much time had passed. But suddenly, she heard footsteps down the hall, outside the bathroom. She screamed for help. Someone answered. Someone came to the bathroom, asked if she was all right. She thought she heard the voice before, but she couldn't recognize it. He opened the bathroom door. Now Sabrina recognized him. It was the school janitor. She always thought the janitor was weird and creepy. He used to give her weird looks and inappropriate compliments. But now, as he freed her, he was the best person in this world for her. He asked what happened to her. He took her to the storeroom, saying there were towels she could use to dry herself. She followed. The janitor handed her a towel and tried to calm her down, said nice things to her. After a long time, Sabrina felt like someone had her back. She thought, at least someone cares about me. She felt so reassured, she didn't even notice the janitor had closed the storeroom door behind her. Now, he was sitting behind her with an arm on her shoulder. At first, the touch felt like a father figure trying to calm his daughter down. Slowly, the touch started to change its color. Sabrina didn't realize it until his hand was clutching her left breast, suddenly and so forcibly. It came as a shock to her. She tried to get away from him, but to her horror, she realized he was too strong for her. She noticed a long, evil grin started foaming on his lips. She never felt so helpless in her life before. She bit him on his hand. For a moment, he let go. Sabrina pushed him out of the way and ran. She could hear his evil laugh following her. The floors were slippery, as they were just mopped. Sabrina slipped on the floor. She couldn't get up. He lunged onto her with his whole body. He pinned her down. His nails bit into her skin. He was holding her with such force. Sabrina tried resisting, but it was no good. She felt like this was the end. She felt like her whole life was just a waste. She felt all her dreams were crushing down. She gathered all the strength she had left and kicked him in the balls with her knee. He ground in pain and let her go. After that, she doesn't know how she managed to get out of the school, but she did, and she even managed to go to the police station. She filed a complaint against him. Now, it was time for her to head back home. It felt like a long, bizarre nightmare was finally coming to an end. Nobody knew the horrors that were happening at the school for a long time until the police investigations were completed and newspapers made their reports. Sabrina wasn't the first victim of the school janitor. He was a predator, hunting for young, beautiful girls. The school bullies were in with him. They were his pawns. The bullies would target innocent girls, bully them continuously, until one day they would lock the girl in the bathroom. Then the janitor would come and save the girls, only to take advantage of them, rape them. None was as brave as Sabrina. None managed to escape. None had the courage to complain. Still, that night haunts Sabrina like a nightmare that won't go away. Still, it keeps her awake in the middle of the night. Brad stood in front of the shelf, looking and searching for more books to read. Going to the library had become part of his daily life. Whenever he was not in school or at home, you would most likely find him in the library, absorbed in some book. Finally, the day has come, the day I always dread of, Brad thought to himself. He couldn't find any new books to read. He sat down in the chair with dissatisfaction. Suddenly, a very peculiar book caught the attention of his eyes. How'd I miss it? Brad muttered as he grabbed the book. I must have gone through this shelf a 1,000 times. He sat down with the book in front of him. It was indeed a peculiar one. The title was almost washed off. The pages felt like old parchment paper, and the print felt like it was not printed. Rather, it was written by hand. But the contents of the book were stranger. It was an anthology of the most random stories. Brad chose one for the middle and started reading it. It tells the story of a construction worker named Hank. What was odd about this story is it didn't read like a story at all. It felt like someone was observing Hank and wrote every detail about him chronologically. It read, Hank came to work wearing a blue shirt and gray pants. He had dense brown hair and blue eyes. Today, his work was at the topmost floor of the building. His job was quite risky, but he was used to doing this kind of work, so he didn't feel any nervousness as he stood on the shallow lift hanging from the side of the building and worked as usual. Suddenly, one of the joints holding the lift snapped. As the building was really tall, people could see him fall and hear him scream for quite some time. Hank's body hit the ground. Just like this, the story ended. Brad found it to be very, very odd. He noticed it was time to go home, so he didn't think that much of it. He put the book back and took off. Brad walked along the street slowly, observing other people around him, things that were happening around him. It was his habit to observe everything closely and think about what everyone around him might be going through. The streets were busy. He saw people rushing with coffee in their hands, phones in their ears. He saw some school kids with their parents, chatting and walking. He saw a construction site just at the side of the road he was walking on. The building was really tall, and it looked like construction was almost finished. Suddenly, He saw something fall from the sky really fast, and a very loud thud came from right in frund of him. It was a man. He fell from the building. Brad walked near the man as the other people started gathering. The scene was hideous. His skull was cracked open, his body convoluted in a jumbled mess. Blood was everywhere. Somehow, the man seemed quite familiar to Brad. He went closer to the body. The man was wearing a blue shirt with gray pants and had dark brown hair. Brad read the name tag hanging on the body's neck. It read, Hank Law. Suddenly it clicked. Brad realized why the man looked familiar. Everything matches with the story he read in the book. It was so striking a coincidence that it frightened Brad. He pulled himself away from the body and stood still for a while. Suddenly, Brad started running towards the opposite direction. He was really in a hurry to return to the library. The book was still there, resting on the shelf. He quickly grabbed the book and tried to find the story about Hank frantically. He couldn't find it. Instead, a different story caught his eye. It read, Brad was a bookworm. He spent most of his time reading books in the library. Even now, he can be seen reading with a book in his hand. After reading this, he was interrupted by the librarian. The library was about to close, and he couldn't stay anymore, so he picked the book up and checked it out. As he was going out of the library gates, he couldn't stop reading the book. It's like something was pulling him towards it, and he couldn't do anything without finishing the story. So, he started reading again as he walked outside into the road. It read, Brad liked reading so much he would even read while walking, but he didn't know that this would cost him his life. As he walked into the middle of the road, a big truck came to him suddenly at full speed. The truck honked and honked, but it was too late for it to stop. So it came closer to him with great speed, and then people on the street could see Brad's body crushing under the heavy wheels of the truck. Blood started spilling as Brad's bent body stuck between the wheels. No one noticed the odd book flying out of Brad's hand when the truck hit him. It landed quite far from him. Not long after, it managed to grab the attention of a curious boy. What a peculiar little book, the boy thought to himself as he picked the book up and put it in his backpack.
Stormy winds blew in the night sky. Lightning struck the earth. The sound of thunder woke Layla up from her sleep, caught her off guard. Lightning struck again, this time somewhere very near. It scared her even more. She was terribly frightened of lightning when she was a little girl. Even though she is an adult now, the situation didn't improve much. Nervous of when the next bolt of lightning would strike, she looked beside her. Ethan, the love of her life, was sleeping so peacefully among all the chaos, she thought. Everything about him made Layla happy. His smell, the warmth of his body, his presence. Layla wrapped her arms around him tightly, and suddenly the mighty storm outside couldn't bother her anymore. He was all she ever needed. Back to sleep she went. Ethan put her arms aside and got up. He gave a look at Layla, the love of his life, or so he thought once. Everything he loved about her seemed like something from some forgotten lifetime, and now most of the things about her seemed to annoy Ethan. By the time Ethan sat at the breakfast table, Layla finally got up, bade good morning to Ethan with a smile. Though Ethan smiled back, seeing Layla walking around made him even more annoyed than when she was sleeping. Ethan just didn't want her to be a part of his life anymore. Ethan was supposed to be at his work. Instead, he went to meet Ruby. Whenever Ethan met with her, he felt joy, lust, and an unbearable desire to make love to her, to kiss her. All the things he used to feel about Layla, now it was for Ruby. In a way, Ruby was a lot like Layla. Why wouldn't she be? After all, they are sisters. To cheat with her own sister, thinking this would make Ethan feel somewhat bad about himself. Then again, whenever he lay in bed with Ruby, had sex with her, it felt that Layla didn't even exist in his life. There was only Ruby. Ruby never really liked her sister that much. From their childhood, Layla was always the good one, excelling at everything she did. So all the people saw Ruby as the spoiled one, the mediocre one, always under shadow of her sister. Deep down, Ruby always believed that her sister enjoyed to belittle her. Now, as Ruby laid wrapped in Ethan's arms, their naked bodies touching each other, she thought to herself, "You always took my share, pushed me into the sidelines. Now I have what was once yours." To her, Ethan was nothing but a means to get sexual pleasure, to get sweet revenge at her sister. There arrived a point in Ethan's life when he couldn't stand Layla anymore. Every moment he passed with her made his hatred stronger. Every night he slept beside her made him want to strangle the life out of her. To Ethan, Ruby was everything he ever wanted, and now Layla was getting in the way. He couldn't stand it anymore. It has to end. One way or another, he thought to himself. He knew Layla wouldn't leave him even if he wanted to break up, so he also knew what had to be done. There was no way other than to kill her. Ruby agreed to Ethan's plan. She said to Ethan, "It is time we do something for us, together." Ethan managed to get hold of an unlicensed gun. They were finally going to get rid of Layla and be together forever. Ethan felt like a heavy burden will be lifted from him finally. Ruby felt that she was going to have her lifelong revenge against her sister satisfied. Finally. Whenever Layla faced any difficult situation, needed advice or a second opinion, she would always turn to her sister Ruby. This was one of those days. Layla needed her sister's insight on something. Ethan was gone out to run some errands, so she wanted to give her sister a call. Unfortunately, she couldn't get a stable connection on her cell to make a call for some reason. Luckily for her, Ethan had left his phone at home, so she decided to use Ethan's phone to make the call. After she got past the lock screen, she saw that there was already a text from Ruby. "That's odd," she thought as she started opening the text, not knowing this one text is going to shatter her reality. "Ethan, my love, it's time. We do it today. After this, we shall always be together and no one can hold us back," the text read. Layla's hands lost their strength and she dropped to her knees. As Layla lay down onto her knees with the cell phone in her hand, Ethan's cell phone, she realized the grave truth. Her boyfriend Ethan has been cheating with her own sister, Ruby. At that moment, she felt like the whole world was crumbling down under her feet. There appeared two silhouettes on the door behind Layla's back. The silhouettes then revealed themselves to be Ethan and Ruby, close together, like how two lovers should be. Ethan was pointing something toward Layla. It was a gun. Ruby was holding Ethan's gun hand firmly. Together they seemed determined to do one thing, to kill Layla. Ruby's other arm was wrapped around Ethan's neck, like any girl would hold her lover. But what was unusual was the knife in Ruby's hand. There was no doubt that Layla's life was coming to a halt. But what waited for Ethan later? Only Ruby and the knife in her hand knew. With a loud tearing noise, the gun fired. Blood spattered all over the room. Layla's head hit the floor. Thick red blood came swirling out of her skull. Ruby whispered into Ethan's ears, "Good job, my love. Now no one can keep us apart." Ethan embraced Ruby with his arms open, still holding the gun in his hands. Suddenly, he felt a sharp, increasing pain from his belly to his heart. The knife Ruby had in her hand came into play. It was crushed into Ethan's heart by her. Ruby said, "Sleep now, my love," as Ethan struggled to keep breathing. Now he was dead too. Ruby never really loved Ethan. To her, he was always her ticket to getting revenge. She wanted Layla to know about them, so she left the text at Ethan's phone when Ethan was gone so that Layla could find out. She could always claim self-defense, tell the police Ethan came to kill Layla and Ruby. Ruby tried to stop Ethan but only managed to save herself, not her dear sister. She knows how to tear up to make her story believable. As she lay down between the dead bodies of her sister and their mutual lover, she thought to herself, "How ironic. Now Ethan and Layla will be together forever."